Yo, what's going on, guys? It's G-Miners here, and with the next day one raid coming out very shortly, I wanted to go over one of the best builds in all of Destiny that you should definitely be taking into the raid, which could potentially be getting even better next season. A lot of people tend to take in a ton of Warlocks for day one raids, especially if they're newer, because of the survivability they have with Well of Radiance. But if you do this with too many Warlocks, then your damage can fall off in boss encounters, which is where this Strand build comes in clutch. I'm sure that most of you guys have seen this build already, or at least seen the damage rotation, but if not, I'm going to be going over everything that you need, from the full Strand setup and the mods that you should be running, all the way to the most useful weapons and exotics for the build, which can change depending on how many people are running this. Starting things off right away, when dealing damage, there are basically three things going on here. First is that we are using the fragment Thread of Generation, which returns grenade energy while dealing damage. The energy we get back also increases if we're dealing more damage, so harder hitting things like heavies and supers give more energy back much quicker. Second to this, we are also using a source of DOT. This stands for damage over time, which are things like Wither Horde, Osteostriga, and Necrotic Grips, which are going to help passively build our grenades additionally with Thread of Generation. And then third and finally, we are using Thread of ASCENT, which is then going to reload our currently equipped weapon whenever we use our grenade. So this helps prevent ever needing to reload our rocket during a DPS phase. In this rotation, as you're going to see, I use Wither Horde and a fusion rifle to immediately proc bait and switch, along with get that dot effect going on the boss, so I get increased grenade regen. I then shoot off my full rocket magazine and throw a grenade to reload and get one extra shot off. After this, supering usually will deal enough damage to fully refund your next grenade, so you can come out of the super animation, throw a grenade down, and then get off a fourth rocket after that. Then the rotation is basically just dealing damage with your fusion rifle or whatever other weapons you choose until you have your next grenade, and then can easily swap and deal rocket damage. Now, obviously, you can't have more than one person sticking a boss with Wither Horde, so in situations where you want multiple Warlocks running this, all you need to do is run Necrotic Grips. These are going to make the rotations a bit worse since your damage over time is dealing less damage, but now you can have an endless amount of people running this. And all you need to do is micromanage throwing your arcane needles during the rotation for that damage over time. I was also running threadling grenades here, but grapple grenades are going to be much better for a few reasons. First, they do have a lower base cooldown, so you'll passively regen more energy throughout the DPS phase. And more importantly, if you don't fully use the grapple, you get like half or 40% of it back, so you also never need to build a full grenade. Lastly, when it comes to next season, this build will be getting a few changes. First off, Thread of Generation is going to be getting a 20% nerf, but especially when using grapple grenades to reload, you shouldn't even be able to feel the nerf. You get grapples back super quickly, but you will definitely feel this with something like threadling grenades. Second, threadlings are also getting another 30% increase in their damage. Testing with the super, it ends up hitting for around 400,000 damage, where the threadlings account for roughly 140,000 of that damage. So this is 35% of the total super damage, which should jump up to 442,000 total damage when this goes live, which is a nice little increase. And then lastly, we are also getting a new Strand aspect. Of the current aspects, none of them really help with the DPS rotation that much, so this is another chance that the build gets even better. I wanted to end the video off by going over the two builds or loadouts that you should have set up ready to go, especially for like a day one raid. When you're in a boss encounter, you're going to want to have one loadout on for a pre-phase for setting things up, and then an actual DPS loadout on that you can swap to going into DPS, where you have something like your 3 surges. Hopping into the Brood Weaver subclass setup, this is going to be the same for both of your loadouts for DPS and the pre-damage phase. You don't want to swap between your aspects or any of your fragments, because that's going to remove all your abilities and your super and make you start from 0. That being said, Needle Storm is obviously the only super option we have and is great for the damage rotation. I run Healing Rift. Strand tends to have good survivability and DR through Woven Mail, but then you can't really get any health back through any abilities, so that's why Healing Rift is great here. And then obviously Arcane Needle is the only melee option that you have. From here, for DPS especially, going into next season where Thread of Generation gets hit by another 20%, you're going to want to be on grapple melees. You can switch this between the loadouts from something like grapple to shackle or threadling if you really want to. I just have both on grapple right now. With this, you're also getting 30 to 40% of that grenade straight back if you just use it at the ground, because the full grapple doesn't go through, so you get a ton of energy returns, and its base cooldown is 1 minute 22 seconds compared to like 232 and 232 for these guys. So for that reason, you're going to get passive regen much quicker through your DPS phase as well. As far as aspects go, I tend to run the Wanderer. As of right now, it's a lot stronger than it's going to be next season, but with this, our Threadling Final Blows can create tangles, and we can then pick those tangles up, throw them at enemies, and then it releases a suspending burst. Obviously, suspend is what's getting nerfed next season, so it's going to be a lot less useful. And then with this, I also tend to run Weaver's Call, so I can just make some extra Threadlings whenever I cast my Rift, and I tend to spam the Rift with this build. Even in a DPS phase, I like to pre-rift so that I have those Threadlings ready to go and get in some extra damage if I can as well. And I think either which way, these end up being better than running something like Mind Spun Invocation. Lastly, the fragments are what actually ends up making this build super strong. First and foremost, we have Thread of Ascent. Whenever we use our grenade ability, our currently held weapon is going to be instantly reloaded. We're also getting bonus handling when using this. And even though it doesn't say it within the game, I believe you do also get some passive reload speed as well. You get like plus 40 reload and then an animation multiplier as well. Usually if you're doing the rotation though, you're not reloading, so it doesn't always come into play. Thread of Generation is next. This gives us our grenades back anytime we deal damage. The more damage, the more energy we get back. So harder hitting things like our super, you will see in different rotations, will actually give us like 50% of our grenade energy straight back, which is super nice. Thread of Warding is just on for survivability. Picking up an Orb of Power gives Woven Mail, which is 60% damage resistance. And then finally, we have Thread of Evolution, so that our Threadlings deal, I believe, 33% more damage than at base. Keep in mind, we are also getting another 30% buff to the Threadling damage next season, so that's definitely going to make our super and the rotation for DPS much more effective. Lastly, for the two loadouts, I'm going to go through this really quickly. This is the pre-damage loadout. I just have things like Heavy Ammo Finder, Ammo Scouts, Kinetic Siphon. My gauntlets don't have any really like useful mods. Obviously damage resistance sources for my chest. And then when it comes to my boots and my class item, this is predominantly what's different. For my boots, just for general play, I'll run Recuperation for healing, Solar Scavenger so that I can pick up heavy bricks before damage phases and get more ammo out of them, especially when using heavy ammo finders and scouts. And then Stacks on Stacks feeds directly into Special Finisher, so I can hopefully get more armor charge stacks and get off more special finishes more frequently for my team. More important than this loadout though is your damage loadout. So if I equip this and then inspect this, nothing really changes. I do have Radiant Light and Powerful Friends to help give armor charge stacks if I ever do use my super or become charged through things like a Well of Radiance orb that I pick up. Everything else is pretty much the same for my gauntlets and my chest piece. And then obviously for my boots, the main change is 3x solar weapon surges for something like Apex Predator that I use in the damage rotation. And then with this, I do also swap out to get time dilation. And then I swap for outreach so that if I ever do use my rift during damage, I get a chunk of my next melee straight back, which helps feed into the necrotic grip and then Thread of Generation rotation for my grenades. When it comes to weapons for this rotation to be as effective as possible, you're going to want something like Apex Predator, where you have either Reconstruction or even autoloading holster on a rocket and then a damage perk. In this case, I'm using Bait and Switch, so I'm going to be using 2 additional weapons to proc Bait and Switch that I'm also damaging with. Having one person on Witherhoard is great. This is the best dot weapon you can combine this build with. It's going to be better than something like Necrotics, so you're getting more damage off and more grenade energy back. Obviously, only one person can realistically stick a boss with Witherhoard and have it be effective. So for that reason, if you want to keep things simple, you can just run Osteo. This pairs really well with Necrotics. Even if you don't use this to pre-apply a dot to a boss in a damage phase, it's still effective for ad clearing. And like I said, people really like just running that primary, special, and heavy setup to keep things as simple as possible. And then the very final rotation that is also super effective is just doing a good old triple weapon swap. You can do this with slug shotguns if the boss is closer for a bit better damage, or you can always just use an auto-loading GL like Truth Teller that I have right here. And then anytime you need to go into like a pre-phase for damage, you can just swap back to Forbearance and use that to ad clear, because you tend not to use too much of your energy special. The nice part about this is you can easily just triple weapon swap, and then anytime you get that additional grenade back, that's when you can just keep your rocket out after shooting it, reload with your grapple, get an extra rocket off on that rotation, and then go back to the triple weapon swaps. These are just the weapons that I recommend, but honestly, if something works for you and your damage doesn't suffer, run it. You also don't always need to be triple weapon swapping, especially during day ones. Just Izzy rocket swapping works as long as you're still able to proc bait and switch. And just as a final note, this build is purely for damage. If you guys aren't struggling to hit damage, I would always take something that's more effective for ad clear and survivability over this. Especially after Root of Nightmares, there is a very good chance that the bosses in the next raid fall over, and you don't even need this build. Anyways, that is all for this video. I do have a ton of builds ready to go for next season already, so make sure to drop a sub if you guys want to stay up to date with that, especially before the raid race, and follow me over on Twitch if you guys want to watch live. As always, have a good one. Peace.